Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about the Broken Spears, the Aztec account of the Conquest of Mexico, written by Miguel Leon-Portilla. Now, this is not a new book. It came out when I was but a wee lad. Actually, maybe slightly before I was born. And it tells the point of view of the Spanish invasion of Mexico from the point of view of the Aztecs themselves, recorded both in Nahuatl text and in Spanish text within the lifetime of the people that survived that invasion. Many of them had learned Spanish to survive. They learned the language of their conquerors. Now, I'm a student of history, and I didn't like history as a topic when I was in high school. I thought it was burdensome, just annoying and boring, and not something I had any interest in whatsoever. Along with a lot of school, I was a very poor student, basically because I discovered when I was around 22 or so that I had been monumentally bored in high school. I wasn't stupid, I just wasn't engaged. My teachers did not engage me in the process. I pretty much thought of us as these animals that we were told to go fetch a piece of information, and as long as we brought the piece of information back and delivered it to the teacher in the form of a quiz or a test, we would get a pat on the head and they'd pass us on to the next grade. And they didn't care if we really comprehended the information, if we understood it, if we were able to assimilate the data into knowledge, which would hopefully eventually be assimilated into wisdom. Critical thinking was not a skill that we were taught, nor were, quite frankly, any practical skills. I wasn't prepared for the real world in any meaningful way whatsoever. I have a fairly poor opinion of public education. I know it can be good, but a lot of the time it isn't. So I didn't enjoy history. Well, I did enjoy role-playing games, which got me interested in European history, which eventually got me interested in history. And from there, I took off on my own. And now I've studied history from all over the world, specifically history of technology and history of weapons. And I've read a number of books that deal with the Maya, the Aztecs, the Olmecs, and how these peoples and their descendants interacted with the European invaders. And I call them that because that is what they are. The peoples of Central and South America were completely viable societies. I do not think that they were necessarily any better or worse than European societies, but they were there first, and so they didn't deserve to have their nation overwhelmed and taken over by others. Just as the nations that some of these societies had taken over didn't deserve to have their nations obliterated or assimilated by the Aztecs, for example. Because the Aztecs were initially semi-nomadic and eventually become fairly expansionistic and took over the area that they were in around Lake Mexico. And I knew how this book ended. Like I said, I know the history. But the journey this book took me on was worth it. Even if it was, admittedly, a depressing journey. Because like I said, I knew how it ended. And I knew that the Aztecs weren't going to survive the trip. But their accounts of what happened, the initial meetings with the Spaniards, the opening dialogue between the two people, the initial battles, and eventually, of course, the open warfare, where some of these passages were just beautifully written. They were compelling. They pulled you in and they engaged you. And it made it more painful because I knew how it was going to end. And for me, the worst part of the whole process wasn't just that because of an historical event and the Aztecs thinking that Cortez may have been the returning gods of their own pantheon, and the fact that they brought disease with them. But for me, the worst part of it was that they converted them to another faith, a faith that I personally don't have respect for, and that is the Catholic Church. As I've said in the past, I understand that individual Christians can be quite reasonable and honorable people, but I don't believe that the Catholic Church is reasonable or honorable. And what they did to the Aztecs was a fine example of that. And I have to say, anyone who is Catholic, anyone who is Christian, anyone who has any interest in the Mesoamerican history, if you have any connection personally with Spain, with Mexico, with any of these peoples, you really need to read this book. And for the rest of us, those of us who have no connection with these things directly, you need to read this book, because it's important. A lot of effort went to bringing the data together, present it to the world so it could be seen in one place. And this book is now part of the curriculum of countless college courses. I don't believe that this is the kind of book that would probably really be taught in high school, though I think it would probably have a greater impact in high school than in college. Because by the time you get to college years, you tend to have a certain level of sophistication, at least when you're not going to keggers. And even though I knew the end, even though I knew that the Aztecs were going to lose, even though that there was a moment when they could have repelled the Spaniards, it was just the first wave. There was no way that they could ever stop the European invasion completely. The Europeans had better navigation, ships, gunpowder, cannons, arquebus, very primitive firearms, but they had very powerful crossbows, and they were at the height of their technological sophistication, and they were very good at killing people at a very long range, at a farther range than the Aztecs could kill people with their bows and their atlatls, their spear launchers. The Europeans brought disease. They brought steel, armor, helmets, swords, spears. There just was no way that the Aztecs could prevail. But they tried, and for that alone, I loved them, because even in the face of thinking their gods had come back, some of them fought. Some of them tried their hardest to preserve the world and the life they had known, even if it wasn't necessarily any better than the Europeans. It was theirs. They felt that they had the right to defend it, and I agreed with them. So, The Broken Spears is a book that I think everybody should read. And I stumbled on a copy, and I wish that someone had recommended it to me, so I'm doing you the favor. Read this book. It's worth your time.